By the 9 and 4, welcome back to the library, where today we're going to cover in brief the first non-divine life forms to ever exist within the realms, that of the appropriately named First. Now, as always my perceptive patrons, this is going to just be an overview and introduction to this collection of monumental personages. Now, to clarify, the term first is used almost exclusively to this collection of 72 individuals, as they are the first of not only their kind, but of intelligent, non-divine life within the realms as well. They were crafted and birthed by the mighty Nine Wings himself, simultaneously, it should be noted. Although there is a healthy conjecture and banter on whom may have actually been the firstborn race, it is quite likely that they were in fact matched perfectly in their creation. Such is the might and power of the Nine Wings. 36. Of both dragons, birthed in 4 clutches of 9, and 36 Analar, who entered the world in 9 clutches of 4. These firsts are among the most powerful beings in the realms. Each can easily rival and even outpower many of the divine beings of the realms. They were born at the beginning of all things, and were tasked by the Nine Wings with the goal of guiding, protecting, and leading the races that would come after them, to prepare them to grow beyond all expectations. Now, as history has shown, they have been less than exceptional in the execution of their duties. However, among the firsts, those that still remain that is, you can still find these grand and noble ideas alive and well, if tempered by the ages. For great lengths of time, many, if not all the firsts, were either scattered, dead, or otherwise lost. Much of this is the result of the wars of Feather and Scale, and the horrible end to those conflicts. But that is skipping ahead just a little bit. In the very early days of the First, regardless of which race they found themselves a part of, they found themselves drawn or interested in specific and various things. These would become the core of who these firsts would become. A stellar example of this, pardon the pun, is the first known as Star Weaver. His specialty is cosmoforming, that is, the creation, adjustment, and if needed, the destruction of celestial objects up to entire solar systems. And Analar, he does not do this with his grace, just popping into reality a star and its planets with a snap of his fingers, but rather by using his grace to either gather or create the base elemental gases and matters necessary for the formation he is creating, and then sculpting them into the shapes and forms he desires via the natural processes that would go into the creation of such celestial bodies. These are accelerated as is pertinent. On the dragon side of the aisle, we have the likes of Kronax, the Time Dragon. He is one of the 4 dragon firsts, with whom the power of one of the celestial elements held not only sway, but suffused his body and essence. While he and his siblings of celestial power were lost sometime during the Second War of Feather and Scale, presumed to be somewhere outside of Jamamar herself, his might was so great that whatever fate befell him out amongst the stars, he managed to be reborn and reincarnated to the realms as Tradiz. Now, while Tradiz is ever so much like his former self in power and strength, those that knew Kronax say that Tradiz is much different in personality. Thus, it is still hotly debated whether his new form is considered a first. Though none have been so bold to ask him in person either, it should be noted. after each of the firsts found their own nature, and the younger races began to rise. They went about the business of guiding the races as they saw fit. Gifts were granted, lessons were taught, and things went along well for quite some time. Then, the first signs that all may not be well began to show. As the Analar of the fifth clutch, Lucian, Dorian, Adrian, and Quentin, whom would become known simply as the Four, chose to slay and usurp the powers of the original gods of the celestial elements: Temporsis, Chris, Aether, and Void. These gods had formed spontaneously in the early years of the realms, and the Four felt that that very act was an affront to the Nine Wings' plans. Such a bold and direct move shocked many in the higher echelons of both sides. However, whether because of the nature of the powers they usurped, or of their own natures, the Four became utterly neutral to all parties at this point, focused only on the perfection of their crafts, that being the various forms of martial arts. Disappearing in the run-up to the First War of Feather and Scale, it is unknown how they may have been able to shift the tides, had they been present. Speaking of the wars, it should be noted that with only one major exception, which we shall cover shortly, the firsts did not take any direct frontline combat role within the wars. Some of them led. Many of them did what they could to minimize the effect of the wars. Most eventually were forced to flee, or were otherwise sealed by the end of the Second War. For the Analar, several were leaders in an exodus to flee the insanity of the war. These would become known as the Antakians, and would return to the realms only after many, many ages. The dragons did not fare much better, losing many to extraplanetary causes, although the possibility of their rediscovery in the Age of Stars should not be discounted, as is evidenced by the return of Stel, the Star Metal Dragon, who is one of the first to journey amongst the stars, and is seen as one of the leaders of the firsts, at least the draconic side. However, with the war having begun or about to do so, and in an effort to end things before they got out of hand, 1/1 of the dragons and 1/1 of the Analar agreed to fight as proxies for their peoples. The planet they met on, if not the solar system it contained, no longer exists, and stopped doing so mere instants after the beginning of that combat. These lost firsts are known as the Debt of War, and are amongst the most highly honored of the firsts. This is when it was agreed that the first would not be fighting in this war directly, as to destroy or risk Jamamar was not only counterproductive, but almost assured the wrath of the Nine Wings, which none would survive or escape. However, we see during the First War, a group of 13 firsts from each side joined together to form a new faction within the previously binary alignment, that of the Revered, who preached a unified path for the children of the Nine Wings, and the end of the War of Elders, or the War of Feather and Scale. Unfortunately, their message was never given a chance to be heard at a time which it was most needed in, as they were sealed away before they could interfere in the plans of their more avaricious siblings. This occurred as part of the Great Work that sits in between the First and Second War, and also sees the loss of contact of almost all the firsts that were beyond the edges of the Credelis system. As the Second War raged on, the few firsts still in any way around or active began to disappear or fade from sight, either by their own design or by fate. By the time the Daemon Vanson was summoned and the wars ended, perhaps as many as 2 of each dragon and perhaps Analar were still around in any capacity. The rest were assumed dead, gone, or sealed away in some fashion. From that point, until the redemption of the Analar during the Age of Valor, the firsts were more a legend than a fact, and even those who had actually dealt with them were often unaware until that point late in the Age of Valor or beyond. For example, Her Majesty Genevieve Notokir had met and dealt with the Lich of the Undercity for centuries on stellar terms before she was aware of the fact that Jackson the Lich was really Jackson the First, the Analar creator of the Kriston race. Likewise, when Fierstein's Skychild gained the attentions of a baby time dragon that would become known as Tradiz, she had no clue for years that her partner in pranks and mischief alike was in fact the reincarnation of Kronax, first of the Time Dragons. In current times, trying to keep track of which firsts are where is a fool's errand. However, according to reports, it would not be an unfair guess to say as many as 70% of the firsts have returned to the realms in one way or the other. That is, 70% of the living ones, of course, as there are, without doubt, several beyond the dead of war that are known to be well and truly dead. However, at the end of this all too brief look at the firsts, 2 of their number require a special mention. Both of them were born of the first clutch of their respective races, and they, like their siblings, found a calling, a path that would guide the rest of their lives. They found their calling to be that of service, and to none less than their own creator, the Nine Wings himself. They are his voice and his claw, deliverers of his judgment and wrath, as well as the ones who select those mortals who will become the hands of destiny that preserve the realms along the lines of the Nine Wings' vision and design. They are known as Ania, the Analar voice, and Naiwi, the Draconic claw. And with those august personages to end upon, I do thank you for your attention during this brief look at the firsts of the realms. Now, my perceptive patrons, until you next visit the library, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other.